Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Welcome to my presentation, Protecting the Future, the Cybersecurity Imperative. My name is Rob Davidson. I'm the Director of Data Science at the Information and Communications Technology Council. And I'm looking forward to sharing with you some of what we have found on cybersecurity in Canada and what are sort of the ways forward to move the industry to where it needs to be. So firstly, we'll start with a little background on what Information Communications Technology Council, or ICTC, is. And I'm part of the digital think tank, and we do evidence-based research on Canada's digital economy at the intersection of the future of work, emerging technology, and social impact. And we're just one piece of the puzzle. The other side of the coin is capacity building. And that's research, and they do research-informed programs to help Canadians meet the needs of the digital economy today and tomorrow. Now, to kind of get us started into the discussion, I thought I'd bring to our attention some news stories from the past couple of weeks that are relevant to the conversation. So first, on the far left, you can see countries agree to urgent action on ransomware, but issue few specifics. So Canada, along with another 20 plus countries, got together and decided to sign an agreement to cooperate on fighting back against ransomware, but not a lot of specifics yet. So this is in early days, but it's a good sign that countries are looking to work together to fight against ransomware, because it really is an international problem and can't be sort of just looked at from a domestic lens. So that news story was just a couple weeks ago. And then in the middle here, I have a tweet from the National Cybersecurity Center of the UK. And is cybersecurity right for you is the story. And so this was just posted last week, yet it's actually a reposting of an article that they did a year ago, trying to get more people into the world of cyber insurance. We'll talk a little bit about that later. And on the far right, we can see some stories related to ransomware again. So the Conte ransomware gang starts new business selling access to victims' data and information. That should be no surprise. First, they start off with asking you to pay them to get access back to your systems. But at the same time, they're collecting information that they can take as they infiltrated the networks, and now are offering that up to sell. So no surprise there. And then sort of the other side, in the Reuters story here, that governments turn tables on ransomware gang are evil by pushing it offline, and or reveal, as they like to be called, by pushing it offline. So governments actually hacked into Reveal's world and shut down key parts of their infrastructure. It doesn't stop them from operating, but it is showing that this is beyond just minor little skirmishes here and there, that there's full-blown battles going on the cybersecurity front, and that the economy is really exposed to some of this activity. And what I want to now draw attention to is a news story from a little while ago that really highlights what we're going to talk about today. And that's this news story from last May, CNN Business: wanted millions of cybersecurity pros, salary whatever you want. And even though that's a bit of an exaggeration, this is really interesting story based on a lot of information they gleaned from the ISC Squared's cybersecurity workforce report from 2020. And that had indicated that globally there was about 3 million cybersecurity jobs wanting filling, and that in the US it was around 370,000, and so on. Now, what's interesting is just last week, ISC Squared came out with their 2021 cybersecurity workforce report, and not surprisingly, there's still a lot of open jobs, and really the US is not much change there in sort of getting their backlog filled. 377,000 open jobs there, and you can see that Canada has 25,000 cybersecurity job shortfalls that are not being filled. And really, this might look like that Canada by population is in better shape with fewer jobs per population that need to be filled vis-a-vis the US. But actually, that also could show that Canada is a little bit behind other nations, including the US, in defining that there is a need for a lot more cybersecurity jobs and activities going on in Canada. So, but it's really interesting data to take a look at. And Canada has some work to be done. Now, last year, the Cyber Center, the Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity, put out their National Cyber Threat Assessment for 2020. And hopefully there'll be a new one coming not too long from now, because I think last year theirs came out late November, early December, I believe, for 2020. But hopefully this year they're going to do it annually, as opposed to, I think in 2019 they missed a year on the report. But anyway, it was a very interesting report, and also identified that one of the key threats to national cybersecurity was the attacks on critical infrastructure, whether that be energy, transportation, finance networks. These sorts of things are obvious attack targets. But from a overall Canadian economy perspective, and specifically the findings for organizations, there were a few key things. First was that the number of cyber threat actors is rising and that they're becoming more sophisticated. So it's what's true about cybersecurity more than many of the digital economy jobs is that you're constantly having to keep up with the threats, that they get more sophisticated, they change how they do things, that cyber criminals are using to act on their attacks. And so there's a real need and a constant need to upgrade and upskill yourself in the cybersecurity sector. And that cybersecurity continues to be, cybercrime continues to be a cyber threat, and that it will most likely affect likely to affect Canadians and Canadian organizations, whether that be individual online fraud or attempts to steal personal financial information or corporate information. The risk is real and the risk is there. So there is a real impetus to move this forward as fast as we can. And that one of the things, and this is kind of part of the Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity's last year's threat assessment, is that one of the key things that organizations need to do is make a list of assets owned by the organization that can increase cybersecurity risk. So like go through and like you can see the little checklist here that's presented that uses operational technology, which is big time in anybody offering critical infrastructure as an example. Employ industrial IoT, manage critical infrastructure, hold intellectual property, store personal data, financial information, operate e-commerce sites, and encourage remote work. And this becomes more important, particularly when you start talking about smaller organizations. Some of you might know that the Canadian government is in the middle of rolling out programming for small to medium-sized companies to accelerate their digital adoption. So not too long ago, they put out the proposal calls for people to help them with the Canadian digital acceleration program, so CDAP. And this is going to put a lot more organizations into the digital realm, yet they may not be aware specifically of what the cybersecurity risks are associated to that and what are the things that they need to protect and or prepare for. So these sorts of simple things that come from places like the Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity are really important. And we'll talk a little bit about data because it becomes one of the key things that organizations think about when they're thinking about why they need to protect information and protect their digital infrastructure. And so in Canada, we of course have PIPEDA, the Personal Information Protection and Electronic Documents Act, and that there's some essential things that are a part of this that help define how you should protect people's information, going through from accountability to consent, limits on what you can collect, maintaining accuracy. So that means that if you have information about somebody that it can't be altered, or that there are ways to identify if there indeed are changes being made that were not appropriate. Safeguards individual access, and in number 10, last but not least, challenging compliance. So this is what exists right now, but there's a lot of movement to put in more protections for Canadians and their data. And organizations have to be aware of this when they're thinking about their cybersecurity plans. So in 2020, there was the Digital Charter Implementation Act and proposed legislation, Consumer Privacy Protection Act, that is proposed. And what does it mean to consumers? Well, it means that it modernized consent rules. It is to encourage data mobility between holders of individuals' data, disposal of personal information and withdrawing consent after the fact, algorithmic transparency for those people, organizations that are using people's data for AI as an example, and that the information, when used and or shared, has been de-identified so that that there are protections for the individual's privacy. What does this mean for businesses? Well, on one side, it does simplify consent, because right now consent is quite difficult with both provincial and federal rules in place. And so that this kind of brings out some clarity if this does pass. Recognition of codes of practice and certification systems, which is good. There's also more power for the Privacy Commissioner of Canada to have order-making powers, and that they're proposing a personal information and data protection tribunal, which can impose fines. Now, that's important because they are suggesting that this could be penalties up to 3% of global revenue, or $10 million as a cap for non-compliant organizations. So it's going from what within sort of the PIPEDA realm is not a lot of teeth, to a set of rules that if things are breached and they find that organizations could have done a lot better to protect people, there are significant consequences, including fines. So there's some stuff that we all have to think about, and we can't even really think just about our domestic rules. That in particular, if we are organizations that are doing e-commerce transactions, maybe with people outside the country, including in Europe, or you have employees that are either, over from Europe and are not, and or people that are working for you in Europe, then you have to follow GDPR rules for handling that employee information. And that sort of information is important as well to protect. So there's a whole lot of things here under GDPR that organizations have to consider. So there's a lot of things for businesses of all sizes to consider here. And that one of the things that the Privacy Commissioner of Canada suggests from privacy guidelines, similar to the the Center for Cybersecurity's checklist, it's like really understanding what are you collecting, why you're collecting it, how you're collecting it, where is it kept, how is it secured. So again, even within sort of data privacy, the cybersecurity element is there and really needs to be front and center whenever it is being considered, because maybe you have great methods for making data private, but if you do not protect that private information, then all those protections are out the window. So there also is concerns that you have to, particularly there's a lot of organizations that are information and data brokers. And so particularly if rules like the right to withdrawal come into Canada as an example under the new CPPA legislation, there's going to be challenges because both GDPR and the proposed CPPA require deletion of third-party data if requested by individuals. So you might be able to delete it on your system, but if you shared some of that data with another organization, you're going to be responsible potentially for following up and making sure they eliminate that data from their databases. So it can get complicated and will be very difficult to track in a lot of cases. So always do your due diligence on third-party data providers, and that there's actually for GDPR following, there's an interesting UK ICO controllers checklist that is out there. So just to keep that in mind. And so coming back to sort of baseline cybersecurity resiliency, and this is from, again, the Canadian Center for Cybersecurity, their baseline cybersecurity controls. And that, you need to have, you got to be able to respond to incidents. So you got to have an incident response plan. And you also need to have insurance for when those incidents happen. Automatically patch operating systems and applications. And if you follow any of sort of the alert systems that provide information about security patches, you know that they're constant and frequent. And you have to have your security software in place to securely configure all devices. And that becomes more important with, of course, lots of people working from home. Also bring your own device sort of scenarios where people are using their own smartphones to interact with their colleagues. So there's a lot of it really important stuff to have there. Use strong user authentication. And of course, provide employee awareness training that is not static. It needs to be something that happens on some frequency, whether it's quarterly or annually, whatever really is the need for your organization to keep them up to speed with what the risks are. And that some of the baseline controls are backup and encrypt data. One of the things we're seeing a lot more of is smaller organizations, of course, looking for secure cloud and outsourced IT services so that they don't have to have all the expertise in-house, and that you implement access control and authorization as an example. So some key things there to consider. And I've mentioned this a couple times, but cyber insurance is really going to be important, and it's an evolving and emerging sort of offering by insurance companies, and they're starting to limit what gets covered as more cases come up, and so it's getting more complex from a underwriting perspective. So questions when buying cyber insurance is like, how much are you protecting? How much of that information is sensitive commercial information? What security controls do you have in place? What about unencrypted media in the care of or custody of third-party providers? So maybe you have some contractors that are working on some of your information. Is that secure? And could you make a claim if you were unable to detect an intrusion until several months or years have passed? Because you may not find out for several months that there was a breach, particularly if there's not a ransomware associated to it and they just came in, took what they wanted, and then got out. And that it's farther down the line that actually any signal comes back to you that something went wrong. And otherwise, what can cyber insurance cover? Well, it can help you with regulatory defense expenses. Again, if that CPPA comes into play for legislation, you'll probably need that, as well as for legal and civil damages, security breach remediation and notification expenses, because a lot of the rules do have notification requirements to notify people that they have had maybe their data breached. Crisis management expenses, forensic and investigation, covering that e-commerce, extortion and or reward payment coverage, business interruption, and any other sort of additional expenses. So these are things that can be covered, but of course, the more coverage you get, the more expensive the insurance becomes. And as they kind of narrow into sort of the formula that they can offer this at sort of at a benefit for both operations, both yours and the insurance companies, it will become a very interesting thing to see how businesses and how many businesses will have cyber insurance that is adequate for what kind of digital footprint they have. The other thing, of course, is there's a lot of people in the digital economy that are actually developing systems and developing platforms and applications. And so really, whenever you're having development activities, one of the things you want to ask is there a security implication here? encourage developers to change their working practices to always include security in the baseline and initial design. Make the tools required available that are required for them. Also hold workshops where, and this is really hold workshops internally and maybe even externally where you red team your systems, where you have people attack and see how you can respond or what weaknesses that they can find. And always challenge the team's security practices. This should be a positive activity that essentially helps them become the top of the business that you're in. And that there's a lot of cybersecurity resources out there, whether it be Cybersecure Canada for certification, the Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity, the Insurance Bureau of Canada. Also, I'm a big fan of the UK's National Cybersecurity Centre. And there's also, particularly for businesses and smaller businesses, I like the Small Business Cybersecurity Corner of the US. So those are some things to think about. And I mentioned that, of course, there's always alerts coming out about unpatched devices or exploitations that people are using. So again, the usual suspects are the ones in Canada, the UK, and the US that distribute those. And I did mention that cloud is becoming a bigger consideration for smaller companies and actually companies of all sizes. And that one of the things that you always have to be aware of is like, what is your responsibility as a customer to protect versus what you're inheriting from the system. And so this is one of sort of a layout by AWS about where the various responsibilities lie. And I think this is really good that this is being communicated. It's just, do organizations understand what this means and what obligations come with this split of responsibility? So it's good to look at that to see what's under your purview versus what did they take care of. And one of the good thing that's happening here is that there are the Cloud Security Alliance, and they're working on assessments that can help organizations sort of understand what security controls exist, and also a certificate of cloud security knowledge. And this is something that professionals will be looking to get so that they can best operate within the cloud domain, but securely, and help organizations with their security. And I wanted to just go into some of the findings in our research at ICTC, and that what are some of the Canadian in-demand cybersecurity jobs. And no surprise, it's things like cybersecurity specialists, engineers, analysts, architects, obviously not in the same volume as some of the more in the line and daily operations people, cloud security architect, not surprisingly, and penetration tester. So these are some of the jobs that we are seeing that are actively being sought by organizations in Canada. And that we also see that there is a number of certifications that are in demand. And this is another place where, just like in engineering and or finance, that certifications become very important. And that the ones that are in demand are things like the Certified Information Systems Security Professional. We also see that things like the Certified Ethical Hacker is starting to move up in the equation as well. So we really see that there is going to be a demand, and that there's a lot more organizations that are probably going to start partnering with these certificate issuing organizations to bundle it into maybe post-secondary school offerings and or other sort of private sector course materials that are being offered by organizations. That these certifications are going to become sort of the currency of the cybersecurity job space. And some of sort of the general skills that we're seeing people are looking for are things like, not surprisingly, information security, network security, being able to do red teaming and blue team type activities, penetration testing, and sort of various operating systems and cloud platforms. But we can't just look at the technical skills, in that there are also sort of the interpersonal and soft skills that are equally in demand and equally important in a lot of cases, whether that be sort of the critical thinking things like troubleshooting and problem solving, other sort of structure, sort of organizational skills like research methodologies, or like what are your communication skills and project management skills, and the like. So we don't, and because this is such a fast-moving landscape, we also see that there's a lot of interest for employees in cybersecurity to continue to network with other cybersecurity professionals, because no one person can keep up on everything that's going on. So that having a professional network is also something that people are looking for. Also, searching for hidden talent. New Brunswick cybersecurity report we did for the province of New Brunswick with a goal to understand why people are either hiring or not employing personnel primarily responsible for cybersecurity. And that, you know, the number one was, of course, all employees are responsible for cybersecurity to a certain degree. So that's an obvious answer, but that's usually probably more the case in a smaller organization than a large organization, and not necessarily talking to the point that there is specialist knowledge that's necessary for cybersecurity. So how do you develop, retain, and find those people? So one of the interesting ones there is that they didn't think they needed to search for people primarily responsible for cybersecurity. 40% said because they have a cyber liability insurance. Not quite sure that's a long-term strategy. So it was really interesting research to see. And one of some of the more specific cybersecurity skills we saw in that report was things like, obviously, operating systems, programming languages, clouds, and container solutions, particularly for cloud deployments. So that gives you just a little more insight in what people are looking for. And as I already mentioned, that there are certain in-demand cybersecurity credentials that are in demand. And here's just some examples of the ones we found for this particular report that came out in 2020. And just one last report that I wanted to draw attention to, which was our 2019 report for Transport Canada on cybersecurity and transport for Transport Canada on transportation and cybersecurity talent. And they are and were really interested in making sure they have sort of the professionals they need to ensure cybersecurity of the transportation system. And as the 2020 National Threat Assessment showed, critical infrastructure is one of the things that bad actors are targeting. So one of the things that we pointed out in this report is that cybersecurity is a process, right from design and procurement of systems right through to implementation, operation, and regular audits. So that there are a number of roles that need to be considered. Not all roles that you necessarily have to bring in-house, but roles that need to be involved. And with that, I just want to mention a couple other things. And at the beginning, I mentioned ICTC has a capacity building arm that builds programs that helps Canadians meet the needs of the digital economy. And one of the ones that's most interesting that I really like on the cybersecurity front is called CyberTitan. And this is essentially Canada's cybersecurity education initiative offered by us, ICTC, in affiliation with the U.S. Air Force Association's Cyber Patriot program. And that CyberTitan is Canada's only national cybersecurity competition for middle and high school students that provide them with the skills necessary to pursue post-secondary education and future career in cybersecurity. Really interesting program. We just last May finished up the year-long process of finding the winner of the 4th edition of CyberTitan, and that was won by a team called Team Teapot out of a school in North York, Ontario. And last year, I think there were 133 participants, schools and teams from all over Canada, from BC to New Brunswick. And that I think the registration for this year, the 2022 competition, has just finished. And so the teams will be doing their training and preparation for this year's sort of regional challenges that lead right up to last year, 11 teams coming to a final or participating in a final. So we really try to make a case that this is important to start it at the middle and high school level to get people interested in cybersecurity so that then they take the programs that best suit launching a career when they get to university or college, to take the right courses and to develop this interest and love of cybersecurity early on. And one of the other things I just want to draw attention to, and I have the URL for this down below, is ICTC's job skill matching tool. It's in its first iteration. Effectively, if you go to this, you can go in and put in your technical skills, and it will tell you what kind of a match you are for a variety of in-demand digital jobs, and including cybersecurity professional, and that it identifies where your skill matches are and where your skill gaps are. And in future iterations of this tool, we will both have the soft skills represented here as well, as mentioned that they're equally important, as well as having the ability to point people at programs in their local region and or online that can help them fill those skill gaps. So we have people right now going through and validating sort of the applicability of courses so that we have a good assessment that they will meet the need in short-term training, so that in a lot of cases, people don't necessarily want to take a 4-year program to fill every one of their gaps that they have. So how do you find a way that you can essentially build a portfolio of skills that are recognized, have been validated, that you can go to the workforce with? And with that, I'd like to wrap up and thank you for your time, and ask if you have any questions, and I'll be happy to answer you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rob, for that presentation. One area that I thought I would jump right in, because you touched on it earlier, is surrounding insurance. To open up the summit, we actually had a workshop on MFA and the implications that has on post-secondaries even getting insured. So could you elaborate a bit more on just the insurance piece?
Sure, and it is a major challenge, Graham, to kind of figure out where the insurance is going right now, because aspects of it are changing. If you follow some of the sort of the industry discussions, they are starting to sort of raise premiums for certain types of organizations, including academic institutions. Matter of fact, because of some of the highly publicized attacks on healthcare system, education systems, and education systems in particular are our favorite targets in the US as an example, and it is starting to happen here as well, that what can be within the scope and affordability is going to be really interesting as we go forward on the insurance. And part of it is really to have it in place for those emergencies where there are breaches and you may be exposed to litigation. So having that covered, but also to have some protection to help you with dealing with the media and dealing with sort of organizing sort of your immediate response. And even if you have an incident response within your sort of cybersecurity infrastructure, where sort of the processes to go through, those are typically focused internally and not the external sort of communications and the like. So some of the insurance that actually helps cover those aspects to bring the right people on to do the response.
Yeah, because I know sometimes, a lot of the times, the conversation isn't a matter of if, it's a matter of when and how to respond accordingly. If you're buying software as a service that has your data in it, whose insurance would kick in? Would your insurance, or would the software provider's insurance kick in?
That's a really good question, and kind of what I was alluding to with the AWS example. It will be written in your service agreement what you are responsible for versus what they're responsible for. So definitely read the fine print, because depending on where they are organizationally, if they're a well-established platform, more than likely they're offloading some of the responsibility to you and or offering you various levels of service that cost more if you get more coverage. If they're a newer organization it's quite possible that it might reside on them. But the fact is, if there's a breach and frankly they go out of business because they're small because of it, you're still probably going to be left holding the bag. So it's still important, even if you are using software as a service, to make sure you have yourself covered through having your protections built properly off of that platform. Understanding, if you subscribe to those platforms, where your data is, because that could become a key component of sort of what happens in litigation if you find out that it's offshore somewhere and that the people were made to understand, or they thought it was domestic storage based on sort of either unclear consent, as an example. So it's best to read the fine print, but also even if it states that they are responsible, that doesn't mean that you're going to be excluded from problems.
Yeah. What about a larger player like, if the breach was caused because of Microsoft 360, for example, and they had all of your emails? Do you know any context around the big players per se?
All I know is that they certainly have enough lawyers to keep themselves protected over the long term, and that there still might be problems for the individual. There might be some unique things that come into the insurance industry actually because of self-driving cars, and it's a little bit of a sideways, but frankly, what some of the talk is that they're going to have the relationship now between the car company and the insurer, and so that the individual is no longer in the payment process of that, so that they can streamline it. But this is all under negotiation between the various players. With the bigger organizations, even if it's most likely due to, say, a Microsoft exposed patch, people will still come after you individually, and they'll name both of you effectively in it. So unless your lawyers are as good as Microsoft's, it's going to be a hard battle.
Yeah, no, fair enough. Is it one of those things like, for example, if I get in a car accident, I call my insurance company, they pay me out and they figure it out on the back channels. Is that starting to happen with cybersecurity as well too, where it's like you call the insurance company and then they'll just figure out who's responsible in the back end?
There is attempts to that, but again, it's moving so fast. I mean, frankly, combining sort of what the actuaries are going through and some of their new AI that they're developing, the models are changing on a frequent basis. So watch your ever more important when you get your new policy statements annually, check what has changed, because there are a number of changes that will be happening in this space for the next probably 10 years, probably permanently. But frankly, you have to be very careful. And so having either good counsel of your own that can go through that paperwork for you, or being part of maybe an industry association, as an example, that you can kind of cooperatively deal with the insurance challenges your particular industry has, may be a way to deal with sort of the complexity. Because as you inject cloud and third party and platforms, this gets very complicated, and it really will come down to what happens in the legal sphere.
Fair enough. You spoke of like certification and ensuring employees have the proper certifications. In this ever-changing world, I look at if you're working the oil rigs, you get a ticket, quote unquote. But I know the science around enclosed spaces and carbon monoxide is not going to really change, but the information around certification on cybersecurity is ever evolve. And how do you ensure that those certifications that you're getting people in are relevant, and that they haven't necessarily become obsolete even before the certification is expired?
Yeah, that is something that I know the certification institutions are looking at. Problematically, unfortunately, there's not sort of a universal cybersecurity association that is kind of aggregating all of this. So there is some competition which blurs some of the lines and makes it a little confusing to understand, well, how often does this one update versus the one maybe offered by ISC squared. So this is a major challenge for organizations, and so part of it is to look at these. When you put that certification on a job posting, as an example, you should understand sort of what that means, as in how often will they have to renew, if they have to at all, or is this just sort of a one time, and so then you're going to have to encourage them, to the individuals that you hire, to upgrade on their own, or provide that in staff. And this is part of the sort of the major disconnect that's happening in cybersecurity talent pipelines right now, is that there isn't a clear definition like there is for an engineer, like there is for people that are working on oil rigs, for their safety certifications, and how often that they're updated. I mean, the speed that things are changing in this industry is, astronomically different. And at the same time, it's very hard to assess how that is changing. And so what is important this year may not be sort of what's front and center next year. So there are challenges around that the certification authorities are looking at. But again, because they're in competition with each other, and frankly with post-secondary institutions as well, to offer training in these areas, there just needs to be some rationalization, or at least hopefully somebody will do a concordance that kind of relates all of them and says, we accept these ones. And that might have to be at the national level, and maybe something that, Public Safety Canada, because some of the work that they do in the cybersecurity space, or the CSE from their perspective, it would be nice to kind of have that concordance that says, if you have this mix of certifications, you're good for 12 months, 24 months, and like how you can upgrade beyond that.
Excellent. And then just tying into like another question, this is ever evolving. How can in Alberta specifically, like we have school districts that have 100,000 students, and then we have others that have 1,000. And so how do smaller players manage this ever-changing world, and what advice would you give to them?
Oh boy. One of the things is to look for good technology partners. And part of that is maybe not necessarily going for like the lowest cost solution provider, but really including in sort of when you're assessing, as you mentioned, schools, sort of their sort of remote platforms. Don't just go for what's easy, go for what at least has good cybersecurity considerations as part of the platform. And also, that things like data security, and in particular, vulnerable students as a group. So you don't want youth information being able to be easily gleaned off of these third-party platforms. So looking for good technology partners, and again, part of it may come down to the best solution is to have your association so that you can share knowledge. And start maybe buying cooperatively too. I mean, it worked for the farmers for a long time, and maybe it's something that needs to come back, because the buying power of the smaller organizations, plus sort of the complexity, really puts them in a spot where they need to have better support. And so it's probably not going to come from the government. And so with that, I think the organizations themselves need to do some organization, and again, pick good partners that, even if they're a little more expensive, if there's more assuredness, and or you can get the insurance to support you as well, that will help go a long way.
I'm sure our Share IT team here is probably happy with your comments on the cooperative side of things.
Well, and one thing that we're also seeing, and it's a challenge for Canadian businesses right now, and we kind of see this across North America as well, is that everybody wants to hire senior cybersecurity talent. And that's not always the case. And so, particularly when we talk about that there's a 25,000 job shortage in Canada for cybersecurity professionals, many of those are unfilled because people are looking for senior people that just aren't available. And so one of the things that we don't have is we've got kind of these programs at the the K to 12 level, like our Cyber Titan program. Then you have the PSI, the post-secondary institutions, providing sort of their take on cybersecurity courses and the like. And then there's a big gap from hireability to from people coming out of those programs into being hired into the business. There's not those junior level jobs necessarily that are plentiful enough to keep the whole system working. So there has to be sort of a reflection and maybe some restructuring of how we do things so that there are opportunities. And again, maybe that's through government to start with. Maybe that there's something where through the certification process, you have to go through internships to get classified. And that might go a long way to ensuring people have the right certifications. But given that it's like still pretty unorganized from an industry and association perspective, those are things that until they happen, it's going to be very difficult to fill those gaps from people coming out of university to getting good jobs in cybersecurity.
Excellent. Rob, thank you so much for this presentation. It was very informative, and I think a good capstone to the rest of the day.